choosing the right part or the right material for the right job. Can't begin to tell you how important that is. And the reason I'm doing this video is in response to the last video that we did. You know, YouTube's supposed to be a community thing, right? You know, where in your comments, you're supposed to have your give and take with the audience. And of course, when a channel gets big enough, it's hard to do give and take in the comments themselves. So I address them in videos. So the last one that we did was about parts shortages and scarcity and so on and so forth. And the thing that led me to make that video was the fact that I was working on a motorcycle and I needed a dowel pin for it. And I went to all of the normal places where I would find a dowel pin, and like auto parts stores, hardware store, machine shop, and couldn't find a dowel pin. So in the comments, there were so many comments of people making viable suggestions of use a piece of bar stock, cut down a bolt, cut down a drill bit, all of these different ideas to replace a dowel. And if it was a dowel doing a dowel job, all of those things would have been viable. Because a dowel's job essentially, usually, almost always, is to just hold two assemblies from moving around. Like for instance here, I'll show you, on an engine block, okay? You'll have dowels, and what these do is these locate the head so that the head can't move around. Remember, the bolts, while the bolts are clamping the head to the block, they're not actually locating the head. So the head is free to move around, and that would cause gaskets to push out and just general chaos and mess. So what they do is they put dowels at either end of the block, and that locates the cylinder head, and then the only job that the head bolts have at that point is just to keep the head clamped to the block. That's the general use of dowels. And also they're used as locators, like here's a dowel to locate the transmission. Okay, at the front you'll have dowels right here that locate the front cover. Right? There's all different applications. They're all over the place and completely normal. So if you go back to the comments on that video where people were suggesting to get a piece of bar stock and cut that down, cut down a drill bit, cut down all different things, right? They're all good suggestions, and I would have done any one of them if that was the case, if I was only using the dowel to locate metal. But the motorcycle has a different application. On that particular application, the dowel isn't just stationary holding things. It's actually a dynamic part of the shifter assembly. So here's one of them out of that engine. Shifter assembly. And you can see it has that light chamfer right at the very top. And that light chamfer at the top told me that this is just a dowel. It's not a specifically machined part for that assembly, but it's actually a commercially available dowel, a standard dowel. And this is what Harley-Davidson decided to use in that shifter assembly. Now, why wouldn't I use a piece of cut down stock or a drill bit? Well, because in this assembly, there are 4 of these, and there's a steel pole that comes like this. Every time you move the shifter, it pushes it down or it pushes it up. And so the hardness of the pole and the hardness of the dowel, or what the pole is contacting, have to be compatible. And since this is a dynamic application for this pin, I wanted to use something as close as possible, because it's, every time you shift, it's being pushed up, it's being pushed down. The drill bit, well, have you ever spun a drill bit in the drill chuck? This is what happens to a drill bit when you spin it in the drill, in the chuck. It gets all galled up. Well, in my application, with that pole always moving this up and down, that's a problem. So that's why I couldn't use a drill bit for it. And that's why I specifically went looking for a dowel. It's in a proper dowel. And that's what we used in here. But now there's another aspect to this too. So let's just say I wasn't a YouTube channel, but I was an actual shop. And I needed this piece to get this job out the door. Many of you were like, oh, you can get them online, you get them on eBay, you can get them on Amazon, you can get them through Fastenal, you get them through all of these different places. And like, yes, I know, I could, if I wanted to, I could have 10,000 of these dowels here, within, let's say, 24 or 48 hours. But if I'm a shop and I'm trying to get my job out the door so I can get the next one in, I can't have this thing apart. It's costing me money, productivity, to have this thing apart, scattered all over my shop, while I wait a day or two for a simple device like this to come in. That's where a lot of you guys missed the point. Yes, I know. I could fill this room with dowels for the right price if I really wanted to. But when I need one then and there, and the job is not just to stick two pieces of metal together, but to actually act as a dynamic part of the assembly, well, that's the exact thing that I need, and I need it now in order to keep my shop flowing. So that's where, like I said, a lot of you guys didn't quite get it. The comment section, so many of you guys really wanted to be helpful. I got some. I'll send it to you tomorrow. I'll make you some. Right? I genuinely appreciate that. But that wasn't the case. The case is I needed that exact dowel to do that exact job, and I couldn't find it locally. That's the problem. That's where we're running into problems. And more, and okay, there's the Harbor Freight stuff. So yes, you can get the Harbor Freight assortment of dowels. I don't really trust the Harbor Freight assortment of dowels. And by the way, they didn't have any because that's one of the places that I hit. I went to, and I know in the video it made it sound like I went on this endless mission, zigzagging all over the place to try to find the dowel. But what I did was I just started, I grabbed it at an auto parts store because that's what you go to an auto parts store when you need a dowel. Well, the first place didn't have it, so I went to the second place, went to the third place. Now you're on a mission. You're covering ground. Oh, yeah. Okay, there's the machine shop up the street. And the machine shop they're not a fabrication machine shop. They clean, they do basic assemblies and surface heads and stuff like that. And how they didn't have one of these on hand, I don't know, but they didn't. And it's the same thing with the motorcycle shop up the street. They just didn't have them on hand. They're becoming scarcer, and so like little things like this are becoming scarcer and scarcer. And the quality of what is available is getting really bad. I mean, like cotter pins they're like butter, bolts that I don't have to tell you. The quality of the hardware and the quantity and the variety of the hardware that we use on a daily basis as mechanics or as gearheads, as tinkerers or whatever, hot rodders, whatever it is, car builders, bike builders, the quality and the quantity and availability of the hardware that we need on a daily basis it's all getting more expensive, it's all getting scarcer, and it's all getting to be a lower quality. And that's why I stressed in that video, start hoarding things, because if you think it's bad now, it is not going to get any better. Now, there aren't any more people fixing cars. There aren't any more shops. People just throw stuff away. We live in a disposable society. And so where in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we built and repaired a lot of stuff. The general society, we've gotten to a point now where just about everything is considered a throwaway. So all of these little odds and ends that we need to keep our machines going are becoming increasingly harder to find. I grew up in the 1970s in New York, and we had Canal Street, and Canal Street in Manhattan was all World War II surplus stuff. And these places were amazing. If you're a gearhead geek and you just love to be surrounded by odds and ends, mechanical odds and ends, these places, there was store after store after store of war surplus stuff. This is 20, 30 years after the war, but there was still tons of, you name it, every thread, every type of fastener, every doodad, every gauge, everything you could think of that was part of the war machine was all in these little bins in these stores. And anything you could dream up, anything you could imagine, you could buy you just buy the stuff in paper bags, and it was like $1 a pound or whatever it happened to be. Just load up whatever you want. And those days are long gone. Like, we've gotten to the exact opposite end of that spectrum, where stuff is becoming harder and harder to find, and the quality is just absolute junk. So that's the follow-up on the video that we did. And I stand by the statements I made. Hoard, start hoarding stuff. And by the way, I know I've got my cans over here, and the cans are just, very random stuff. But back at the house, I have a fastenal cabinet that's like loaded with all of these things that are very specific. But rather than just run to the house, I, tip over a coffee can and go hunting. So that's it. I hope you got something out of that. I'll see you tomorrow.